Have you ever wondered what happens when a leader builds his power on an image that is not real, and then one day the truth can no longer be hidden? What happens when the mask slips, when the evidence is too clear to deny, and when the story of strength is revealed as nothing more than a fragile illusion? That moment does not end quietly. It shakes confidence, fuels anger, and threatens the very balance of a nation. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for being here with me today. We live in a period filled with deep uncertainty, but also with a kind of clarity if we are willing to look at the truth in front of us. My intention is not to shock you or stir emotions for their own sake, but to bring light to the reality unfolding before our very eyes. And let me start with a truth that even Mr. Trump himself will not be able to deny. The United States is no longer the unquestioned center of the global system. The world has shifted in ways that are dramatic and irreversible. And when Mr. Trump finally comes to terms with this truth, when he sees the scale of America's decline caused by reckless policies, short-term thinking, and his own pride, he will face a breakdown because the story he built his entire political career on will crumble before him. For decades, America operated under the belief that its dominance was permanent, that it could set the rules of global engagement without any real pushback, and that its military, financial, and political power could bend nations to its will. This belief was not only part of Washington's foreign policy, but also repeated in the rhetoric of leaders like Donald Trump, who built his image on the idea of restoring what he called American greatness. Yet today, the collapse of that myth is perhaps the most significant development of our time. The world changed slowly at first, then quickly, and the foundations of U.S. dominance are breaking apart right before us. The shock of this reality is unsettling, not only for America's political class, but it will be devastating for Trump, whose entire brand depends on showing strength. When he finally has to accept that the old global order is disappearing, his meltdown will not only be personal, it will symbolize the closing of an era. Think about the massive shifts in the balance of power across the world. After World War II, the United States stood as the unmatched economic and military giant, holding nearly half of global GDP and steering international institutions like the IMF and the World Bank. But today, those numbers tell a very different story. America now makes up less than a quarter of the global economy, and new alliances, markets, and institutions have weakened Washington's central role. Nations in Asia, Africa, and Latin America no longer see the U.S. as the automatic leader. Instead, they look for partnerships with rising powers like China and India, or regional groups offering new ways of cooperation. The global system is no longer unipolar, it is multipolar, and that change cannot be reversed. Here is the truth that Trump cannot ignore. The economic weight of the world has shifted eastward. China is not only the factory of the world, but also the biggest trading partner for over 120 countries. Its Belt and Road Initiative has connected economies across Eurasia and Africa. Technological progress in areas from artificial intelligence to clean energy is now being led outside the West. For Trump, who believes tariffs and threats can hold back China, this is not just a problem. It is the total dismantling of the stage on which he built his political show. The American public is also starting to see through the false promises. The myth that trade wars and strong words can undo decades of global economic change has been shattered by higher consumer prices and fragile supply chains. What once sounded like strength now looks like desperation. But this collapse of the myth goes beyond economics. It runs deep into politics and diplomacy. The days when Washington could simply sanction another nation and expect obedience are fading. Countries like Russia, Iran, and Venezuela have shown they can bypass American restrictions by creating parallel systems of trade, finance, and cooperation with non-Western partners. What once looked like proof of American control now looks like a sign of overstretch. Trump's repeated claims that America can force its enemies into submission sound empty when reality shows the opposite. Each failed attempt at dominance highlights the limits of American influence, exposing cracks in a system once thought unshakable. The American people are not blind to this. They can see that endless wars in the Middle East brought neither lasting safety nor real prosperity. They notice that massive military budgets have not stopped living standards from falling at home. They watch as roads and bridges decay, schools struggle to survive, and healthcare becomes more unaffordable, even as Washington spends trillions on conflicts abroad. The myth of dominance was always sold as a promise of well-being for citizens, but that promise has evaporated. When Trump insists his way will make America win again, more and more people are asking, win what and at what cost? Trump's greatest weakness lies in the collapse of this illusion. His strength has always rested on the image of a fighter who could bring back America's supremacy. But what happens when the fight is shown to be impossible to win? What happens when voters see that the problem is not a lack of toughness, but a fundamental change in the world order? That will be the reckoning. That will be the moment his carefully crafted narrative begins to collapse. And when that happens, Trump will not have the tools to deal with it, because his entire strategy is based on repeating a myth that no longer fits the reality of our time. Let me leave you with this thought. When the myth of dominance breaks, it is not just a shift in foreign policy, it is a national shockwave for America and for Trump himself. The adjustment to this new world will be stormy, emotional, and disruptive. Yet facing this truth is the only path forward. America cannot live inside illusions forever. The real question is whether its leaders, including Trump, will have the courage to face reality before the collapse drags them down. The rise of the BRICS alliance has already reshaped the map of global power, and its impact is being felt in ways leaders like Donald Trump are not ready to accept. For years, American politicians, especially those who thrived on nationalist rhetoric, dismissed these nations as divided and incapable of serious coordination. But the facts today are clear. BRICS is not only alive, but growing, not only symbolic, but structural, and its rise points to a long-term rebalancing of both economic and political influence. The shock of this truth is huge because it forces the U.S. to face what it has resisted for decades. Global leadership can no longer be monopolized. And Trump's dream of America receiving unquestioned loyalty from the world is disappearing fast. The fact is simple but unavoidable. BRICS now holds more total economic power and purchasing power parity than the G7, the wealthy Western nations that once shaped global trade and finance. That single fact destroys decades of assumptions about how the global economy should function. China's central role in this transformation cannot be minimized. It is not only the world's manufacturing base, but also the leader of new technology revolutions in AI, renewable energy, and infrastructure. India, with its massive young population, is set to become the third largest economy within a decade, powered by digital growth and consumer expansion. Brazil has used its natural resources and agricultural exports to strengthen its role in multiple markets. Russia, even under heavy sanctions, has turned its economy toward Asia and expanded energy partnerships. South Africa, though smaller in size, acts as a vital link between Africa's emerging economies and the rest of the globe. Together, these nations are not just a coincidence of geography. They are a deliberate counterweight to the Western-led system, and their growing strength now forces every country, including the United States, to reconsider where real opportunities lie. What makes this shift so dangerous for Trump's narrative is that it is not just about statistics, it is about legitimacy. For decades, the G7 set the financial rules of the world through the IMF and the World Bank, both heavily shaped by U.S. power, but BRICS has moved quickly to create alternative. The new development bank built to fund infrastructure projects without the strict conditions attached by Western lenders is a direct challenge to that system. Nations that were once stuck in cycles of dependence on Washington or Brussels now see a real alternative. For Trump, whose America First stance relies on using U.S. leverage as a weapon of pressure, this is a nightmare. It cuts into the very heart of his approach, because once countries are given choices, America loses its monopoly on power. Another striking element of BRICS is its constant expansion. Nations from Saudi Arabia to Argentina have shown interest in joining, attracted by the possibility of becoming part of a bloc strong enough to counter Western dominance without forcing members to accept Western rules. Energy powers in the Middle East, major farming exporters, and key African players increasingly view BRICS as the future of cooperation. Think of the consequences if oil-rich countries link themselves more closely into this system, aligning trade and energy strategies with the East instead of the West. For the United States, which has relied for decades on the petrodollar and Gulf security deals, this represents a massive shift. The key point every American must grasp is this: BRICS is not about overthrowing the West. It is about building balance where the West no longer dictates terms unilaterally. That is why it resonates so strongly in the global South. Countries that are tired of conditional aid, unfair trade, and Western arrogance now look forward to joining a system that offers respect, fairness, and opportunity. This attraction is something Washington cannot easily fight against because it is rooted in decades of anger with a one-sided world order. Trump's fiery speeches about punishing China, forcing allies into submission, or bringing back industries may impress his domestic supporters, but on the global stage, they only accelerate the hunt for alternatives. The louder he insists on American dominance, the quicker the world creates ways to avoid it. And this is where the danger lies. Like many nationalists, Trump thrives on denial. He will insist BRICS is meaningless, that U.S. military superiority still ensures control, that sanctions can crush any rival. But denial does not alter facts. The rise of BRICS is not just another headline. It is a deep trend reshaping trade, investment, and diplomacy. The United States can adapt or resist, but it cannot erase the shift. For Trump, who built his entire political identity on the fantasy of reviving an era of absolute supremacy, admitting BRICS is real means admitting that the world has moved forward. That is a truth he is not prepared to handle, and when reality sets in, the collapse will be personal and political, symbolizing the wider fall of an outdated worldview. Inside America, the economic situation is no longer something that can be hidden with slogans or campaign rallies. Inflation is eating away at family budgets. Wages, when measured against rising prices, are stagnating. Inequality grows wider every year, and America's infrastructure is crumbling in ways that shock anyone who remembers the ambitions of the mid-20th century. This is not just a temporary downturn. It is structural decline. And here lies the contradiction that Trump and his base cannot solve. The policies he pushes, from tariffs to tax breaks that mostly benefit the wealthy, have not solved the problems. They have worsened them. The point is blunt. People are starting to see that the struggles in their daily lives are not mainly caused by some foreign rival, but by choices made inside their own country, often by leaders who claim they are fixing things. Take inflation as an example. Families have been squeezed by rising food, rent, fuel, and medical costs. While Trump often blames China, migrants, or political enemies, the real drivers are much closer to home. Decades of neglecting supply chains, lack of public investment, and financial speculation that pushes housing out of reach are the deeper issues. These are not imported problems. They are results of domestic failure. And people notice it when they pay for groceries or utilities. No matter how loudly Trump points to external threats, the truth is revealed in household budgets. Wages tell the same story. Yes, the job market shows growth, and yes, unemployment looks low on paper. but the quality of jobs has dropped. Gig work, unstable contracts, and roles with no benefits dominate life for millions. The old promise that hard work leads to a steady life is fading. Even where wages do rise, inflation eats away the gains, leaving workers exhausted from running faster while staying in the same place. Trump's slogan of America First was supposed to stop this trend. Instead, his time in office pushed policies that helped corporations through tax cuts and deregulation, leaving regular workers facing the same broken system. The truth that cannot be denied is this: the American dream is slipping, not because of competition abroad, but because of decisions at home that put elite interests ahead of ordinary people. Infrastructure decay proves the point further. Americans who travel abroad are stunned by modern trains, airports, and digital networks across Asia and Europe. Meanwhile, U.S. bridges collapse, water systems grow unsafe, and rural broadband remains poor. For a country that once proudly built the interstate highways and reached the moon, this is embarrassing. Yet under Trump, the talk of rebuilding was empty. Infrastructure became a repeated campaign slogan, but nothing real happened. The result is a nation falling further behind while others advance. The growing inequality gap is perhaps the most damaging trend of all. While billionaires multiply their fortunes, the middle class shrinks and poverty expands. Housing prices shut younger people out of ownership. Student loans block opportunity. Healthcare remains the most costly in the world while producing mediocre results. Trump's policies did not reduce these divides. They often deepened them with tax benefits for the rich and cuts to regulation that protected the already powerful. The promise of prosperity sounds hollow when prosperity is shared only among the few. This is the core truth. The system is not failing everyone. It works extremely well for the wealthy and well-connected, but it fails the majority who are told to wait endlessly for a revival that never arrives. And here lies the turning point. The American people are beginning to understand that blaming outsiders does not rebuild highways, lower rent, or improve schools. They see that no tariff, war, or nationalist slogan can replace serious planning, fair policy, and real investment. Trump depends on distraction and scapegoating, but he cannot stop this awakening forever. As more citizens link their problems to domestic policy choices, the ground under his political theater weakens. That is the danger for him. When the audience no longer believes the show, the performance ends. Trump built his political image on the idea that he alone could restore greatness, that his America First agenda would secure dominance abroad and prosperity at home. The image he created was not just of a politician, but of a fighter, a man bold enough to take on global elites and force allies and rivals alike to bend. For many supporters, this was more than politics. It was theater, a play of strength and certainty in a world that felt uncertain. But the stage he built rests on fragile ground, and reality is breaking it apart. The key point is unavoidable. The central promise of Trumpism that America could reimpose supremacy by sheer willpower is clashing with the fact that the United States no longer holds the same control it once did. And the evidence piles up daily. Take trade wars as an example. Trump declared that tariffs on China and others would restore industry and protect jobs. In reality, they raised consumer prices, strained supply lines, and triggered retaliation that hurt American farmers. The image of winning trade battles has been replaced by the truth of economic damage carried by ordinary families. Foreign policy reveals the same weakness. Trump styled himself as the master negotiator who could outplay rivals and restore respect. Yet his administration left the world more doubtful of U.S. leadership. Alliances weakened as he demanded loyalty without offering cooperation. Rivals like China and Russia expanded influence while America stood more isolated. Sanctions, once seen as a universal tool, lost power as nations built alternative systems of finance and trade. His claims of making America respected again clashed with a global system that adapted to avoid Washington's grip. At home, his brand is just as exposed. Trump's image as the voice of the forgotten worker is contradicted by a record that boosted the wealthy and worsened inequality. Corporate tax breaks, deregulation for profit, and a never-delivered infrastructure program show not leadership, but empty branding. For supporters, the performance may have looked convincing at first, but as reality sets in, the gap between words and lived experience grows too wide to ignore, and once people realize the promises were an illusion, the brand collapses. This collapse is especially dangerous for Trump because his power depends on perception. He thrives on the aura of invincibility, the belief that he always fights, always wins. What happens when the truth can no longer be hidden? What happens when the evidence of America's weakening position is too obvious to deny? The sharpest point to understand is this: Trump's greatest strength, the image of power he carries, turns into his biggest weakness once people see it was only an illusion. His story does not bend easily to reality, and when he is forced to face it, the breakdown is unavoidable. The deeper issue is that Trump has no other story to tell. His entire appeal is tied to the idea that America can somehow roll back time, reclaim a lost dominance, and bring back a world where Washington dictates the rules alone. But history does not move in reverse. The global economy has shifted, alliances have spread out, and problems at home cannot be solved with slogans or by blaming others. When these truths become clear to the public, Trump is left only with noise. And noise, no matter how loud, cannot cover up failure forever. When Trump is faced with facts that destroy his carefully designed image, he does not stop, think, or admit being wrong. His natural reaction is to escalate. We have seen this pattern again and again, from his days in business to his presidency, and even now in his ongoing political life. It is simply not in his nature to admit loss. He sees every challenge as a personal insult, every fact as a weapon against him. That is why his eventual collapse is not just about him. It risks shaking the political balance of the United States. The warning here is urgent. History has already given us signals. During his time in office, whenever Trump was trapped by undeniable facts, he chose not to accept them. He chose escalation. When investigations looked into his actions, he did not simply defend himself. He went on the attack against the very institutions leading those inquiries. When his policies failed to produce results, he did not change direction. He doubled down and shifted blame toward others: immigrants, rival politicians, foreign governments, even his own team. This reaction to lash out is not a side detail of his personality. It is the core of how he operates. As the myth of American dominance falls apart and his story of strength fades, we should expect this reaction to grow stronger. His collapse will not remain within him. It will flow into public life, amplified by rallies, media, and social networks, making the divisions in America even worse. Consider his use of words. Trump has always known that language can stir anger, motivate crowds, and distract attention. His speeches are less about explaining policies and more like calls to battle, framing politics as a fight between us and them. This works as long as people believe he is leading them to victory. But when facts show that victory is slipping away, when the economy is struggling, when global influence is shrinking, when America is no longer feared but often challenged, his only move is to raise the volume of his words. He will make his threats harsher, his claims wilder, and his divisions deeper. The danger here is serious. His personal breakdown will not mean retreat. It will mean a bigger national crisis fueled by growing polarization. The results of this are not imaginary. We have already seen them. On January 6, 2021, the world saw what happens when Trump refuses to accept reality and instead insists that his story must win at all costs. That day was not an exception. It was the natural result of his refusal to admit defeat. Now think of that same refusal, not just applied to an election result, but to the undeniable reality of America's changing place in the world. The truth that the United States cannot simply order outcomes, that it must share power and negotiate, is a direct threat to Trump's worldview. His likely response will be to stir up nationalist anger, call compromise betrayal, and frame any recognition of limits as surrender. This is not just political theater. It is the structure of a breakdown that puts the nation's stability at risk. Trump's influence over his supporters makes this more dangerous. To many of them, he is not just a politician, but a symbol of resistance against elites, institutions, and unwanted change. When Trump unravels, his base will not instantly abandon him. Many will see his angry escalation as proof that he is fighting harder than ever. This creates a cycle where Trump's inability to face reality is strengthened by a loyal following eager to believe his version of events over the evidence in front of them. The warning here is sobering. A leader's personal breakdown can turn into a shared illusion, pulling millions into a fight that has no basis in fact, but enormous real-world effects. The broader danger is for governance itself. A Trump who feels trapped is not one who softens, but one who pushes harder against boundaries. We saw parts of this during his presidency, attacking the press, pressuring courts, undermining agencies, and ignoring oversight. In a future crisis, with his story collapsing and his pride on the line, his instinct will be to go even further. He will frame institutions themselves as corrupt, draining away public trust, not only in opponents, but in democracy itself. This is why Trump's potential meltdown cannot be taken lightly. It does not stop at his words. It eats away at the foundation of governing itself. And still, this clash with reality is coming closer. The United States cannot avoid the facts of changing global power, economic difficulties, and domestic unrest forever. At some point, the words and the reality will meet head-on. Trump has no plan for handling that moment other than denial, attack, and escalation. The warning every American must understand is that his personal struggle to protect his story will not remain personal. It will be pushed onto the whole country, turning his refusal to face truth into a national crisis. That is the core of the danger ahead, the collapse of one man spreading into the breakdown of democratic stability. America's future does not need to be about decline, but it cannot be built on illusions of endless supremacy. The idea that the United States can dominate every area of global life through military strength, tariffs, or single-handed decisions is no longer believable in a multipolar world. The real way forward is through cooperation, diplomacy, and an understanding that shared progress is not weakness, but survival. Yet for leaders like Trump, whose political identity is built on showing domination, this truth is unacceptable. The choice before America is not global rule or collapse, but either embracing cooperation or sinking further into isolation. The proof is all around us. Look at global challenges, climate change, pandemics, cyber threats, energy transitions, and financial risks. None of these can be solved by one country alone, not even the United States. To think tariffs or threats can fix supply chain issues or stop a virus crossing borders is to ignore today's connected reality. Cooperation is not optional. It is the only practical path. Yet Trump has often treated alliances as burdens, agreements as betrayals, and diplomacy as weakness. This may bring applause from those at home who want to see toughness, but globally it cuts America off from solutions it needs. Economic facts underline this. The U.S. no longer holds most of the world's GDP. Its markets remain large, but are tied closely with Asia, Europe, Africa, and Latin America. Trying to cut off China entirely or fight endless tariff wars would only speed up the decline Trump claims to resist. Meanwhile, groupings like BRICS, regional trade deals, and development banks are moving forward without asking America's approval. The message is clear. The world is building new systems, and the U.S. must choose whether to be inside shaping events or outside watching its influence fade. Agreements on arms control, joint investment in clean energy, and cooperation in health are areas where America could still lead, not by controlling others, but by partnering with them. Yet Trump's record is to step out of agreements, weaken trust, and call diplomacy surrender. That story may serve his politics, but in practice, it leaves the U.S. weaker. Leaders who see cooperation as strength will be the ones who create better futures. Trump instead traps himself in a win-or-lose game where every deal is betrayal and every compromise is weakness. It is self-destruction. The American people themselves are signaling the need for change. Surveys show that younger generations value working with other nations on global issues. They see that the U.S. cannot stand apart while the planet heats, while technology races ahead, or while others make deals that bypass Washington. They know that greatness in this century will be measured not by how many enemies are punished, but by how many solutions are found. The generational warning is clear. Trump may cling to an outdated vision of power, but the future voters are not convinced. This is the turning point. America can adjust, accepting its role as a leading partner in a multipolar world, or it can cling to illusions of supremacy and watch its power slip. The truth is simple. Cooperation is not weakness. It is a form of strength. By working with others, America multiplies its abilities and shares its burdens. By refusing to cooperate, it isolates itself, losing credibility and chances for progress. Trump's refusal to recognize this is not just his problem. It is a risk for the whole country. When the world calls for partnership and America offers only empty noise, the result will be isolation abroad and anger at home. And that is the final warning people must understand. Survival and prosperity in this new age will not come from clinging to myths of control, but from using the power of cooperation before it is too late.